Good evening. First of all, thanks very much to Arian for such a generous introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be here today. As Arian mentioned, my research focus is on late period to early modern Chinese art. And working on Empress Dowager Cixi became a connection leading us from my own research to a new field that is Pulu today, because Pulu, as you can learn from the title of my talk, was a Manchu aristocrat as well. So today, in this short talk, my goal is to introduce Pulu's three identities. First, as a Manchu aristocrat. Second, as an artist. And thirdly, and more personally, I feel most importantly, as an instructor and mentor of art. So, as some of you might know, Pulu was a very important painter in modern China. But I think this slide definitely explains the uniqueness of him the best. So you have Pulu in the middle of painting in the photograph, and to your left, you have a piece of calligraphy he wrote in Manchu. That's actually a combination of four auspicious characters: luck, fortune, longevity, and happiness. So this calligraphy demonstrates his Manchu-ness, his identity as a Manchu aristocrat. But then to your right, you also have a painting. He created a fabulous painting of a monkey hanging down from the tree, demonstrating his excellent painting skills as an artist. So I think we'll begin with his Manchu identity. Okay. So speaking of Pui, then I think it's very useful to have this genealogy. So you have Pulu down here. So let's begin with his earlier generations. His great-grandfather was the Daoguang Emperor, who had, among his children, he had two sons who used to compete in the throne. So the one who won was Xianfeng Emperor, and his younger brother, Prince Gong. Prince Gong, again, had several children, and his eldest daughter, Princess Rongshou, would later be adopted by Empress Dowager Cixi. And his other son, Ying, would become the father of Pulu. So you actually see this direct lineage toward the most important and prestigious family, Aixinjiro family. And for Pulu, his mother was a consort of Ying. So even though he was born in the estate of Prince Gong, but he did not enjoy as much privilege as the successor as his elder brother Pu Wei. We'll get to that debate later. But from this, you can see that with this family lineage, from the moment when he was born, he was to be given a complete set of education that only very few modern Chinese painters would have the opportunity to access. Right? So here we have a very quick chronology of Pulu, and we will see this change of identity from a Manchu aristocrat to a citizen in Republic of China. So that's why I think it's interesting to put this title of from Aixinjiro Pulu to Pu Xingyu, because Pulu really is his first name. Pu is the name for his generation. But after entering the Republican era, most Manchu would turn their the first character of their first name into their last name. So the two names refer to the same person. In Taiwan, Pulu is more famous as his modern name, Pu Xingyu. So here we can see the chronology of him. He was born in 1896 in the estate of Prince Gong in Beijing. And in 1911 to 1912, there was this transition of politics in in China, from the Qing Dynasty to the Republic of China, and it directly influenced the family because the General Yuan Shikai at the time actually wanted to enter the estate of Prince Gong. So Puru's mother had to take the young son with her to escape from Beijing, and they spent more than a decade away from Beijing in the suburbs. That's a very unique experience of him in his young age, and therefore in his art creations in later days, you sometimes will see interesting images of rural life, because he actually learned how to farm and how to raise poultry while he was away. So that was a very major transition from a young aristocrat receiving classical education to a very down-to-earth living experience. And that definitely enriched the subject matters that he could choose from. Okay. And in 1915, he became the member of Shennan Painting Society. That was a very important moment, demonstrating to us that Puru was already pretty active as a painter in his community. And then in 1924, he finally returned to the place where he was born, the estate of Prince Gong. And in the same year, Pu Yi was expelled from the Forbidden City. And the year after, he became a member of Songfeng Painting Society. And this painting society was very different from the previous one, the Shennan Painting Society, because it was exclusively for the Manchu painters. As a Manchu aristocrat, Puru had worked very hard throughout his life to maintain that identity, and especially in after 1945, he proposed several times to resume the rights of the Manchu as a ethnic group. So that gives you a sense that even though Puru was mainly a painter, but he was also quite active in some of the political movements in modern China. And in 1926, Puru in Beijing held his first solo show with his wife, and that was the first major career success of him to spread his fame as an accomplished artist. And of course, it seems that 1920s was a very good decade for him for the development of his art career, because he not only organized a painting society, had his solo show, he also met Zhang Daqian. And we also see that in 1928, Puru extended his contact to other countries. He had a trip to Japan and stayed there for a while to make friends and to teach as well. And in 1934, he became the faculty of the National Beiping College of Art. So these events is the first official position of him as a teacher. And in 1937 to 1945, of course, we know that was the time of Sino-Japanese War, and the Puru remained in Beijing. But there was no longer this possibility of staying away from the intervention of the Japanese, and the best he could do was to remove himself from the center of all these politics, because at the same time, his elder brother, Pu Wei, was actually seeking political opportunities from the Manchuria, where Pu Yi was wielding that puppet regime. So for the trajectory of Puru, he moved out of the estate of Prince Gong into the Summer Palace, or Yiheyuan. But I need to correct the year, because here I identified the event in 1939, but actually it happened earlier in 1934, right? And he continued to practice while he sojourned there, and in 1945, after the Sino-Japanese War ended, he was invited by his friends, including Qi Baishi, to travel to southern China, to Nanjing and Hangzhou. And it was in Nanjing that he proposed to resume the rights for the Manchu. And he was very much discouraged by the political reality, so that marked a failure of his political career. It was also around this time that he experienced the most important transition in his life, the event in 1949 when he moved to Taiwan. So this removal from the mainland would be a fundamental change to his artistic creation, because he never had a chance to go back to Beijing again. So in his later creations, we actually see a lot of nostalgic traces and poems inscribed on his paintings, expressing his nostalgia of the good old days. And it seems that while Pu Ru was in Taiwan, in addition to teaching as a faculty in the Department of Art in National Normal University, he was also very international in a way. In 1955 to 1956, he first of all went to Korea to teach and demonstrate painting, and it was a big success. So after that trip, he went on to Japan, and as we know, in 1928, he already made a trip to Japan there. So there, he had a lot of old friends introducing him to various painting groups, to take in students and to travel. So he spent a quite long time in Japan from 1955 to 1956. He didn't really want to leave Japan, but because of his very unique identity as a former Manchu aristocrat, the nationalist government in Taiwan grew very worried, because rumors rose about Pu Ru's possible transition of nationality. So eventually in 1956, Pu Ru's wife flew from Taiwan to Japan to bring him back. Otherwise, the painter actually wanted to stay a bit longer for this freedom of creation. Because back in Taiwan, he was asked several times to become the mentor of Madame Chiang Kai-shek. But because of his identity as an Aishingzhero Pu Ru, he declined, and that actually made his teaching career a little bit difficult. Okay? And in 1958 to 1959, again, Pu Ru went on trip. He traveled to Thailand, to Bangkok, had exhibition and demonstration, and then to Hong Kong. He guest lectured in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And it was not until 1959 when he returned to Taiwan again, but then he fell ill very soon and died of cancer in 1963. So as you can see, the life trajectory of Pu Ru was a journey of a lot of ups and downs, and especially after 1945, he traveled extensively, and the rationale behind this constant travel was, of course, as an artist, he wanted to be exposed to a new environment, to see nature. But this kind of internal conflict between his own Manchu identity and the nationalist government's requirements and intention of giving him a difficult time was also a factor. Okay. So that would be Pu Ru's identity as a Manchu aristocrat. And now I want to move on to Pu Ru as an artist. And as most of you know, as a Chinese artist, you are supposed to be able to write good calligraphy as well, because you use the same tool to create. And Pu Ru is an accomplished calligrapher, but as you can see from here, did not fix himself with any particular style. He was very capable of writing different kinds of scripts. Of course, for various occasions, we see him writing these kind of characters for New Year's celebration and the couplets. So you actually see that Pu Lu, as a calligrapher, he mainly created pieces for these kind of special occasions in daily life. But you also see something very whimsical. A palindrome poem is the poem that you can actually read in different, in reversed order, and you can start reading anywhere. So it actually requires a lot of deep understanding of classical Chinese literature, and it also shows you the kind of education Pu Lu had received before the fall of the Qing dynasty. And as a landscape painter, Pu Lu also chose a very different approach. We know that most of the late imperial Chinese painters, especially literati painters, prefer this quote-unquote southern school versus the northern school. And by southern school, that would be the tradition of ink painting that can be traced all the way to the 7th century painter Wang Wei, and with the intention of depicting the image of the mind. And by contrast, the quote-unquote northern school would eventually evolve into something more like a professional, more like a kind of painting style for professional painters. And for Pu Lu, yes, indeed, he began learning by studying the masterpieces of Southern School to carry on the tradition of literati painting. So here we have an example for you. So not very typical example, but I think it would be, because of the format and composition, it would be easier for you to grasp that idea. So to your left, is a round painting, probably originally for Fen, of Pu Lu. So you see a lot of blank space and very watery textures of the mountain and the plant and the inscription. And these kind of privilege over the blank space and this kind of very poetic composition actually can be traced to the Song Dynasty court art. And here you have an example of Li Tang's landscape album. So you also see this kind of large blank space and detailed, and especially pine trees in detail. But then shortly afterwards, as you can see from these slides, Pu Lu had a different idea about learning painting. In the previous slide, what you see is very refined strokes, very watery, and with a lot of blank space in the background. But then later on, if you focus on the rocks, then you actually see something very expressive. He would use his brush with the side touching the paper and with very rapid speed. So you actually can see very expressive brushwork, especially these, that can be traced back to Southern Song court painter, but then became the signature of fashionable Chinese painters in the 15th to 16th century that we call the Zhe school. So this combination of the southern and northern schools was a signature of Pu Lu, and it also made him very special because among most of the Chinese modern painters, Pu Lu was one of the few painters who could carry on both lines of traditional Chinese ink painting. And of course, from the modernist point of view, some scholars would comment on his artistic creation as conservative. But I think it has a lot to do with his awareness of combining his painting with his identity. He is the keeper of that tradition passed down to him from his family education. And speaking of this tradition of family lineage, then we have to move on to a very cute motif in this painting, the monkey. Pu Lu was in favor of painting these creatures from a very young age, mostly because he spent quite a long time in the suburbs, but also because in the family collection, his family collection, there was a fabulous hand scroll painted by Northern Song court painter Yi Yuanji, But unfortunately, he sold this painting to the to Osaka Municipal Museum when he was in Japan for financial reasons. But we know that the similarity between the monkeys of Puru and the monkeys you can see in Yi Yuanji's painting shows you that this family collection nurtured his artistic creation a lot. And it is from these family collections that he was able to gather the essences of the northern and southern schools of paintings. But even though we often define Puru as a literati painter, but his range of artistic creation really is much wider than a typical literati painter who only specializes in landscape painting. So aside from monkeys, Puru is also very good with religious paintings. So to your left, you can see a painting of Bodhisattva Guanyin in white robe, and he especially painted a lot of these kind of paintings after the death of his mother as a kind of prayer for her. He later on, especially when he was in Taiwan, he created a lot of images of Zhongkui, the ghost vanquisher. So we don't really know the rationale behind this turn from religious painting to ghost paintings. There are multiple theories. Some people would claim that it was because the painter was disillusioned at the time, so he utilized this subject matter as his critique of the politics at the time. But I want to point out that the image of Zhongkui, the painting of Zhongkui, had its long tradition in the artistic creation of Qing court art. A lot of Qing emperors would commission images of Zhongkui in the new year, and some even created images of Zhongkui by themselves. So the example closest to Puru would be Empress Dowager Cixi, who actually painted images of Zhongkui, and now they're still preserved in the Palace Museum in Beijing. So I think in addition to interpreting Zhongkui as the painter's political critique, I think it's also very important to contextualize it from the perspective of his family lineage. And now I want to talk about Puru's third identity as a teacher. So from the chronology of Puru, we know that he had taught in different institutions. But aside from his work in office, he also took a lot of students at home. So here you have a photograph of his birthday party in Taiwan, and in which you have a lot of students gathering here to celebrate the birthday. And as a mentor, Puru was very into this kind of individualized mentoring. So he would create painting manuals for his students. And from my study, I know that multiple students preserved his manuals. And here I'm showing you the examples of his paintings that was done for his student Dora Fu when he was sojourning in Japan. So it was very detailed oriented. When demonstrating the way how to paint a tree, he would give very clear instruction, telling the student which details to pay attention to, and how you should turn your brush, and how much water you should have in your brush. And then this one down here is a painting manual of rocks, different kinds of rocks. This kind of personalized teaching would make Puru a very popular mentor, but he also made a very unique presence. In 1950s in Taiwan, he agreed to be filmed and made a 20-minute documentary of his demo. And it has 20 minutes, but I think we can begin with starting from 30 minutes. That would be his demo of painting. So this is what. So the narrator said that the painter is very diligent. He painted every day. His wife would prepare the utensil and paper for him. And this is a demonstration of painting a very common subject matter of a hermit under a pine tree. So you would begin by painting the trunk. And then you move on to the branches. And then afterwards, you work on pine needles. And you would have a hermit underneath the pine tree. So you first will work on the head and face, and then the clothes. And then the rock. The slope where on which he stands. And finally, the plantation. Alright, so this is okay. Alright, so that was the painting part. So the rest of it would be his musical talent. Apparently, in 1950s, he already felt this necessity of preserving the way how he created and making it known to his students and even to the public. So this idea of preserving and spreading the traditional way of painting at the time in Taiwan was very much welcomed by the authority and promoted as well. So in this regard, Pu Yi, along with the other two painters, Huang Junbi and Zhang Daqian, who sojourned in Taiwan after 1949, are together called the three masters of who crossed the strait. But among them, only Pu Ru really worked very hard on his role as a teacher, his role as a painter who utilized the latest technology at the time to preserve the way how you create a piece of traditional Chinese ink painting. So lastly, I think I'll conclude my very simple and short lecture on Pu Ru by returning to this slide. So this painter is unique, but unfortunately understudied in contemporary scholarship because of his multiple identities as a Manchu aristocrat and as a painter who moved from mainland China to Taiwan at the height of his artistic career. And then also died relatively young because he passed away in 1963. But his third identity as a teacher really makes him one of the most important figures that we should study, because a lot of his students would later become accomplished ink painters both in Taiwan and some are in the United States now. And his other two fellow painters, Zhang Daqian and Huang Junbi already had their solo shows in this country in the past decades, and his counterpart in mainland China also are enjoying the attention from the public due to this re-emerged passion toward traditional Chinese culture. But the fact that a lot of Puru's paintings were, are still in the collection of Taiwanese museums and in the hands of his students makes it a little bit difficult to, put on a show that really would speak his importance as a artist in modern Chinese art. So today, I'm really grateful to see that Dr. Wang was so generous enough to take the lead, to give us this exhibition on Puru's paintings, and also some pieces created because of the inspiration of the painter. So that would be a short introduction to the artist, and if you have any questions or comments, I'm here to answer. Thank you very much.